Hello and welcome. So thank you very much for being here. I really wanted to take this opportunity to talk to you about how we can really turn insight and action from data. And so I've got a really exciting presentation to share with you. There's lots of interesting frameworks and methodologies as part of this, but we also want to look at some of the concrete examples that are out there. One of the things I first want to show you is this example here in the exploration and production industry. So this slide is actually showing us a little bit in terms of the opportunity space that's available. So we worked with one of the companies in the exploration production space. It's a Forbes Global 2000 company, and that's actually a company that spends about $2.8 billion a year on drilling and completions. And so that's really, obviously a huge amount of investment that they're making in terms of capital expenditure as well as operational expenses as part of this. And so one of the aspects here is understanding how do I actually help to people in the field resolve problems faster. And it's really a combination of data. If you think about everything that's available to you in terms of the field space, one of the areas, if you think about the pumps, the lifting ability, thinking about the actual oil well itself, and thinking about how you're lifting casing out of there and lifting as part of that drilling operation, we really want to think about when we have this opportunity here, we want to say, okay, well, we have this data that's coming from an IoT device. We have data, we understand about what the lift capacity, the pumps that are working in times of this oil field head, and then we want to really think about, okay, when something goes wrong, who is it that we call when we need to deal with these things? And so the opportunity here is to think about what kind of data we're actually producing from the hard assets, the tangible assets, and how we can actually match that up with understanding what people are doing inside of collaboration systems. So if we think about expertise inside of your organization, it's oftentimes really hard to profile people inside of your company. So even if they have skill sets, they have specific things that they're working on every single day, they don't keep their profiles up to date as much as possible. So what we really want to think about is how we actually extract a lot of that profile data from what they're doing. And so you think about using SharePoint, we can think about using Office 365 and other areas as part of this. And so if we're mining data from Office 365, we actually have the opportunity to keep a profile up to date every single day. And so it's a computer-generated profile that actually understands the collaboration, what the signals are inside of Office Graph, and what you can do as a particular individual. That vector is continuously updating. Basically, it's in a very granular area, and so you're really looking at the opportunities of what you can do and what you're working on. And so what I want to show you now is a little bit in terms of that kind of data, but expressed in a Power BI dashboard for your organization. So as I switch over here to my browser, I'm going to show you a little bit in terms of this dashboard that shows us three main things. We're seeing an expertise graph based on what it is that people are doing and how they're working, how they're collaborating. It basically is looking at your peers and how else you're working with people inside of your organization. It's also showing you your influence level. So it actually can track the kind of influence that's going on inside of your organization. Who's influential in a specific topical area? Who's influential in a combination of topical areas? And we can also see as part of this here, the interest level. So just because you're interested in something really doesn't make you an expert in it, but you do want to grow that interest inside of your company. So we want to put together these two types of resources. We've got talent management, we've got HR systems, you've got learning and development, knowledge management, things that you're investing in heavily. And then on the other hand, we have what we talked about earlier, which is really the data that you're getting from hard asset systems out in the field. So I can do a few things with this dashboard here as I scroll around. I can actually check out all of the interest levels by subject. I can actually graph out different areas here that actually show me where these topical areas lie and what kinds of interest and influence and expertise levels are a part of it. And I can actually get a lot of quantitative data as part of that. So the other aspect here is to be able to see, okay, here's the sentiment by selected subject, the sentiment by selected users, and then the ability to see interest levels and expertise levels of selected users. So I can actually drill down and say, okay, it's a combination of skills that I'm looking for. So say I'm looking for somebody who has expertise in the Gulf of Mexico with certain kind of casings, maybe certain kind of well pumps, and I can actually look for that combination of expertise. If that person isn't available, maybe that expert is already deployed out in the field somewhere else, and you're in a project management situation where you're dealing with a trouble ticket and you want to deal with it very quickly. So the opportunity is here then to say, okay, who else has this combination of expertise? And maybe it's actually a group of people, right? Maybe it's actually a team of people inside of your organization who can come together with all these different expertise and have that team deployed as part of this. So you can actually check out all these different areas here. I can see the expertise level of selected users. I can check out the interest level of selected users, and I can scroll around and actually query a lot of this areas too. I can even check out the sentiment of subjects. So we can actually see if people are posting in a positive way, in a neutral way, in a sort of a less than positive way. And we want to see from that perspective of understanding what it is that they're seeing out in the field. Do they seem happy? Do they seem unhappy? Do they seem angry? Is there something happening very quickly? So it actually gives you a lot of kind of real-time data, basically also from the interactions of what you're doing every day. Okay. So that's kind of my Power BI dashboard that helps me to understand from an expertise perspective what's going on inside of my organization. So now let's take it down one more level. Let's think about what we can do in Azure Machine Learning in terms of the data that we have available to us. So in this example, I have an Azure Machine Learning Studio set up. And so what we're looking at here is a model that helps you to process the data from an oil well. And so this oil well basically is drilled obviously right into the ground. We have a straw basically through the center of it, and we're basically pushing up a lift load on it. And we want to check through there to have some idea of maybe when things are actually going to change, right? We will want to think about, okay, I don't want to wait till the problem is actually occurring inside of the casing or having an issue with well lift in the well pump. I actually want to be able to predict when that actually happens. So I can get a lot of data from the IoT devices that I have deployed out in the field, and I can also look at how experts look at graphs inside of your organization. So they may already have ways of identifying. It's that years and years of intuition that experts have. And so maybe there are certain patterns that they look for when they're looking for well lift problems. So I can use that kind of information here in Azure Machine Learning Studio to actually help you understand that data and maybe think about how to learn from those neural network problems as part of it. So as I check this stuff out, I can actually go ahead, I can run this model, I can move these elements around here, and then I can actually run those selected experiments. I can actually then go in and look at how I can apply different techniques as part of this too. And so I check out, I've got a predictive experiment here. I've got some training experiments that are running in the background that are basically looking at the data that I have uploaded here. And then I can actually look at these other models as part of it. So if I'm not happy with the training that I'm doing on a certain way, I can actually approach this in areas here. For example, if I want to use a sweep clustering model that helps to look at parameters inside of my model, I can even look at how to do hyperspaces or other clustering models that might be useful. So even if you don't know about machine learning per se, even if you're not a data scientist, as long as you can upload this kind of data, you can connect it in obviously with Hadoop, with SQL, even with Excel if you just want to play with it for a training model. And then you can actually take that data and process a lot of that results from machine learning. So I wanted to show you those two elements because they're quite discrete in those elements and what you're doing, because we've got expertise on one hand, we've got interest and influence of the people, those soft assets that you have deployed in the field, but they're actually your most important assets. And then on the other aspect, you have the hard assets that you're deployed and you're actually dealing with problems and trying to predict when a maintenance issue may occur so that you can deploy those effective resources. Okay. So let's pause back here and we'll go back into our experiment here. So I wanted to take a little minute here to talk about the context of what we're seeing. So what we see right now in the world today is these kind of discrete elements. And so we see a lot of different systems and we don't really unite them inside of our organizations. And so if we look at the opportunity space from a worldwide perspective, we're seeing actually social, we're seeing machine learning, we're seeing very discrete elements as part of this. And so we're looking at how we can use analytics, how we can put together enterprise learning, maybe search, maybe the travel costs, all of these different elements as part of it. So what we really want to think about is, okay, how do we move this forward in terms of opportunity spaces inside of our organizations? So here's a kind of great data that's available for a McKinsey Global Institute study that was done very recently. And this really shows us the IoT space. So we have this opportunity space, and you'll see that there's some great opportunities out here. If you think about process manufacturing, hard engineering, you'll see that the factory space in the IoT world actually has $3.7 trillion of opportunity space available to it. You're also looking at opportunity spaces around offices. So $0.2 trillion, a huge opportunity in by itself, even compared to these other ones too. And then even looking at how we're doing work sites, how we're doing homes and outdoor other areas too. So if we think about a lot of the data that we're generating as part of the Internet of Things, really thinking about predictive maintenance is just the first step as part of it. So we really want to think about inside of our organizations, How do we grab all of this data? We have data from collaboration systems, we have data from IoT, we have data from machine learning because we're doing a lot of predictive maintenance as part of this. So we really want to think, how do I actually use this data in a reasonable way inside of our organizations to help facilitate better decisions? And this is what this is really all about. You want to spend money very effectively inside of your organizations. You want to understand decision making as much as possible. So you have to really understand things in the context of learning. And learning is really a delta of knowledge. So this is a very basic equation, but it really helps to express this stuff. The most we can think about when we're putting knowledge together, we're actually putting learning together. And so we want to accelerate that pace of learning. We want to think about how we can accumulate the knowledge together. So we've got data that is coming from machines, and we've got data that's coming from people. And if you think about it, it's all part of the Internet of Things. They're actually asynchronous networks, and that's actually an edge network, and that's a very common case in the Internet of Things. So I like to think about people and collaboration systems as being part of that Internet of Things as well. So when we look at actionable learning, there's a few steps that we have to really think about. One of the areas is really looking at how we can actually quantify tangible value as part of it. So we can put it together in this form of a framework, but we can also look at the people, process, technology value proposition as part of this. So let's look at the data to learning action cycle here. So we're going from data acquisition all the way down to action. And it's very important to be able to break out these different parts and then understand which tools and how things map to these different parts. If we think about a holistic decision, we want to understand the value of information, the leverage of information on this particular decision. So when we're breaking down a system, we want to understand how much is information worth in a specific decision. We want to make sure that we understand what the value of that information is as part of that decision so that we can actually identify how much money we're willing to spend to get better information as part of it. So do I need to see 10% faster information? Should it be 20% better information? If I can help to quantify that understanding, then I can understand how much this value is actually worth to me inside of the organization. So what we're really trying to do as part of this is actually accelerate this time to life cycle here. And so we're looking at the value of the data in its raw form. As much as you may have it, you may have boodles and noodles and noodles of it. But we really want to think about how much is it really worth. So data in its raw form is worth almost nothing unless you can process it. But where the value really comes into is understanding how we can institutionalize insights and knowledge as part of it. And so if we're looking at how to institutionalize things inside of our organizations, we have to go a little bit faster. So we want to understand the sources of value, and so here's a couple of ways of thinking about it. One is the expected direct value of what it is you're doing inside of your organization. So there's decisions in the capital expenses and operating expenses. All of these projects have these two sources of value. We also want to understand the expected value of learning as part of this. And so the value of learning inside of your company is immense, but oftentimes people don't take the time to calculate this and actually understand what it means for your organization. So we want to think very carefully about how we can look at research and development, how we can look at engineering, how you make investments into your innovation pipeline to understand what it is you need from an expected learning value. So if we look at expected learning, then we can help quantify how much, again, is an experiment worth to me? How much should I pay to get better information from there? And therefore, what can I use as part of this? We have a data to learning action cycle here. And really what we're really looking for is the ability to compress this cycle as much as possible. We want to think about how we can actually peak this cycle and basically reduce uncertainty as part of it. So that's what we're looking at in this graph here. So what about people, right? I talked about expertise earlier, I talked about interest levels and influence and what's going on inside of your organization. Obviously, making sure that people are on board is a huge source of direct value as part of this. But we want to make sure we are also getting executives on board as part of this too, because we have to understand how much those decisions are worth, again, inside of the organization. We always want to make sure we have very credible justifications and that we're really looking at the return on investment as part of that. Okay, so let's take a moment and think about how we can debottle some of this value chain. There's a couple of different theories that are available to you here. One of them is a theory of constraints. And so we want to think about how bottlenecks will actually accumulate as part of that value chain. You want information to be flowing as fast as possible and as wide as possible, basically through that value chain. And then we want to be able to discretize it as we go into these individual elements. We want to think about how we can debottleneck some of this action here, and then really look at how we're delivering that value as part of it. So we want to make sure that we're having a continuous, a dynamic, and strategic process for every decision that we're looking at. So there's a couple of things that I want to mention here from a real-world application standpoint. In the IoT world, this is one of the areas that really is expanding. The more and more we're seeing around automation and control, we're seeing IoT applications that are actually happening, looking at tracking, at monitoring, at predicting. We're looking at how real-time environments and physical processes can really be augmented as part of this. But we want to make sure that we're also having the opportunity to look at autonomous controls, right? If we can actually report out a lot of this data from the field, then we can really also think about how we can deploy people in a very strategic manner and maybe reduce some of the travel costs that are associated with that, but also to be able to work in environments where people traditionally cannot. So underwater, subsea drilling, that kind of stuff is part of it too. If we think about our edge network scenario here, so we're looking at the Internet of Things, we're thinking about our field example where we basically have this construct of being able to report in from these different devices. And so we think about this edge of network scenario that actually, the couple things that we're trying to drive from it. The first thing is to avoid these costly issues, and so we are getting alerts about things that really matter. We want to make sure, again, the alerts that we're getting are just not a lot of noise or maybe things that are routine. We want to make sure that humans are really being alerted as part of this. We want to make sure that we're able to send this data to Azure Machine Learning so we can actually data and process it. And then we want to make sure that we're actually constructing this network to suit the type of devices that we have. So in IoT, and obviously in many field applications, the internet is really, really bad access. And so we're really having an asynchronous network, we're using maybe older devices, and it can be very difficult to actually transmit that data. So we want to think about, again, that construction of the edge network, and are we using protocols that are actually really efficient as part of this? So we're looking at Internet of Things. Again, we have to work within the bounds we have right now. We can think about how to architect a lot of this stuff for the future, but really understanding the data you have now is very important. Okay, let's think about another opportunity space inside of your organization. So I wanted to talk a little bit about private consortium models. One of the capabilities I see that organizations are not using so much these days inside of their value chains, but is really a big opportunity for the future, is this blockchain model. You may be familiar with blockchain from understanding a little bit about Bitcoin, but actually looking at how things work behind the scenes, how pricing works, how transparency works in terms of blockchain might be a great way of thinking about resources inside of your organization. If you're thinking about how much value of information is worth inside of your company, you can think about how much would it be worth between different areas of your organization. Maybe you have different output levels coming from different parts of the globe. Maybe you have different well heads that you're looking at, and you're looking at what's the kind of value that's coming out of each of those. So we want to think about how can we help to understand the pricing internal dynamics as part of this. A lot of people are not using blockchain inside of their organizations right now, but there is a great opportunity to do that. It's basically a way of thinking about modeling the construction inside of the organization and think about how we're doing supply and logistics as part of it. What kind of internal transfer pricing do you want to have offered? How can you actually have autonomous machines actually look at how those pricing structures are being made inside of your organization so you know how to divert resources as fast as possible? Okay, so the next area here is looking at our theory of constraints. We want to look at how we can evaluate and address some of these bottlenecks. Obviously, over time, we're going to see these transition inside of bottlenecks, and we're going to see how those target bottlenecks are going to resolve. We want to make sure we have this throughput coming through in terms of information, and we have this continuous cycle of basically getting faster and faster in the data to action. We want to make that as quick as possible, and we want to keep moving those bottlenecks along. So as we're doing this, we're actually looking at a continuous improvement cycle. You might be familiar with this, of course, from Six Sigma or lean thinking, but this is really thinking about it in terms of decisions. How can we keep iterating on decisions and making those faster and faster? So we want to look at how we're moving those bottlenecks along the chain and keep resolving those bottlenecks as part of it. So how do we put some of this stuff into action? So I've talked a lot about, an example out in the real field. I've talked about all the different tools and technologies that are available to you, as well as how you can actually put data together from both hard assets and basically the soft people assets inside of your organization. So we really want to think about the few things here. We want to look at how the process and functional area that we're addressing. We want to look at some of the recurring decisions inside of your organizations that are really critical. We want to make sure that we're understanding where those opportunities are, and then think about how we can actually commute backwards in that chain. Start with the decision, look at the information blockages along the way, and then understand again how much you're willing to pay to resolve some of those information boundaries. It's just things that you can do to accelerate or improve this decision making as part of it. The other element here is looking at how we're implementing these high ROI enhancements, right? We want to keep monitoring and iterating this result as part of it. And then we want to make sure that we're actually looking at these new value bottlenecks. Is there opportunities there to use new technologies or new approaches as part of it? So with that, I think that's really my final point in this area here, is to share this quote. One of our esteemed colleagues when I was way back in Shell, when I was working there, was actually a man who wrote the Living Company book, and it's been a very inspiring quote. It's never been truer as it is now. Learning to learn faster is the only sustainable competitive advantage. If you think about it for your organization, it's true for your business unit, and it's even true for your career. So I hope I've helped explain a little bit in terms of this decision to action framework, looking at how we can transform data into action on a decision framework that's really consistent, that's continuous and understanding, but then also how to mine expertise from what it is you're doing inside of your organization, taking that expertise data and understanding what you could do from collaboration systems to help inform what you're doing in the well field or in the process operations that you're doing every single day. Thank you so much, and I've enjoyed this presentation.